welcome everybody. Seriously, they said it could never be done. Star Trek fans sitting next to Star Wars fans. Peacefully, a civil discourse. We just don't know. And yet, on an afternoon in Anaheim, California, right here for WonderCon 2013, the impossible has been made possible with the help of science. Today, it is my great pleasure, nay, duty, to turn that civil discourse into an all-out bloodshed. But I'll start out by introducing our panelists. She is a clinical psychologist from UCLA, a lifelong Star Wars fan and collector, with a particular affection for the Galactic Empire. She is no stranger to conventions, having done several panels on the psychology of various superheroes as well as cosplayers. And just this January, in issue number 16 of Batgirl, written by Gail Simone, she solidified her own place in geekdom by officially becoming Barbara Gordon's therapist. Her partner in crime for today's melee is an Emmy-nominated writer for Robot Chicken. Nobody knows Star Wars like Robot Chicken. He's also written his own horror sci-fi novel called City Under the Moon. And he's the screenwriter for the upcoming film Hell and Back. But this is where I love you the most, sir.
Let's get it on.
He just this year he was chosen by Elliot Serrano as one of the hottest geek guys 2013. Excellent taste, as I made the list in 2005. I don't drink it in. I thought it was supposed to be a joke, and then, they said it wasn't. So, on the Trek side, he is a Trekkie with a PhD in psychology. If they gave PhDs in science fiction, I can assure you this man would have one. When he is not treating social anxiety disorders at the New York University Medical Center, he is writing for BrainKnowsBetter.com, all about the psychology of science fiction. Dr. Mattu. And finally, you don't know Star Trek if you don't know this gentleman. He has written the Star Trek The Next Generation Companion. He has also released a set of archival interviews on CD that are absolutely brilliant. Everyone you would ever want to hear talk about Star Trek are on these CDs called Trekland on speaker. He is also behind the documentary that chronicles the biggest debacle in Star Trek convention history, called the Con of Wrath. It is absolutely brilliant. Larry, Dr. Trek Nemecek. So, before we get into the bloodletting,
oh my God.
Clearly these two franchises they've touched so many lives. I would gamble by saying that their respective fan bases are probably at least double what we see in this room. What is it about these two, philosophically, psychologically, that has ingrained themselves into us, into our own psyches, and how have they touched and really sort of informed your own lives leading up to this point? We'll start here.
Ladies first, right?
Ladies first. I'm from the South.
Can everyone hear me?
Nice.
Yeah. Very good. Where are my Star Wars people? Just so I can. I don't want to, confuse anyone with my science blue. I just want to be sure you can see that it's a little obscene. I'm not trying to be too obscene, but so this is the first question. It's a personal question because I was introduced to Star Wars as a young child, like probably many of you, and later learned more about Star Trek. And I have to say that there is something about Star Wars. Of course, it's nostalgic, and there's this deeper emotional association with Star Wars, the story. But the story of Star Wars is really psychologically about this inspiring idea, this notion that you have this moisture farmer who saves the galaxy. It's an inspirational, motivational story, and really goes to the depths of psychologically what it is to have self-actualization and individuation. So this is a story that I think resonates with everybody, and that's why it's most meaningful to me when it comes to, really the meaning and the symbolism of Star Wars. That when we think of, and when I say self-actualization, I mean this, fulfilling your own potential, being everything that you were destined to be. It's what psychologists consider the highest level of human need. Psychologists actually have this hierarchy of needs, the most basic being survival, getting fed, getting shelter. Then higher level needs are like social needs, relationship needs. But psychologists believe the most advanced, most difficult to achieve human need is self-actualization, to reach your potential. And I think that's really what Star Wars is about. And they have badass costumes.
I'm from the South too, so I'm just letting all this go unchallenged.
Right. The actual point giving hasn't been given. Like we've not started divvying out winners and losers, and she is railroading you guys. How about Star Trek? How has that informed the lives of those of us?
I think that needs a psych answer to reply to a psych answer.
Hold on. So first off, are the Trekkies in the house?
Yeah! There's not as many because they're all at work today. You want it? I can bring it. Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
So, kind of following up to that, personally, I saw Star Wars first when I was a little kid, and it was fun. It's a lot of fun, but I didn't want to live in that universe. It's kind of scary. Walking around, some dude can just go like this and choke you. That's a scary universe. I don't want to live in that universe. And my brother took me to see Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. And boom. Boom. Boom, Star Trek VI.
I'll have you know that's an even number.
So what happened to me when I saw Star Trek VI is I said, I can see myself there. I can see us there. I can see a reality where all of this could be happening. And what Star Trek did to me personally is it showed, Star Trek's, it's a mirror. It holds a mirror to your face and it says, this is us, this is humanity, these are the issues that we deal with. And I would not be in psychology. I would be, I don't know what I'd be doing. I'd be in my parents' home playing video games if it wasn't for Star Trek. It gave me a way of understanding myself using science. And I think what it's done for so many people is shown us about how, as humanity, we can grow and we can improve. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more. But it really showed us how, with empathy, with science and knowledge, we can overcome a lot of the differences we have, unlike Star Wars, where people just continue to beat the crap out of each other.
All right. So.
These butter rebut. You're cool. You're worried about the force choke, and you're cool with the dude putting the worm in the guy's ear. That's no problem, but you don't want to be choked by a guy in a black costume. What's up with that?
You know, you can't legislate misuse of biology. Flora and fauna are there for anyone to use.
Are you sure? Have you tried to legislate? Because they're legislating a lot of strange things there. Round one, fight.
All right, so now that we've argued the points of each franchise as a whole, it's time to get into the real fun. I'm going to ask some questions that are non-specific to the franchises themselves. We're going to avoid the so who would win in a fight between Han Solo and Captain Kirk, because we just can't answer those questions. Look, Han Solo is two-dimensional dogfight space. Captain Kirk is three-dimensional submarine space. They'll never even see each other. Okay, so I'm a good moderator. Okay, so I'm going to ask some questions. It's up to the psychologists to bring the book learning, and it's up to their patriots to bring their incredible knowledge of the franchises, in addition to the knowledge you two already have. So with that, and then in the end, we will give you guys an opportunity to decide which argued their points better who walks away the winner of WonderCon 2013. We'll start out with this. You have one man who was seduced into the dark side by his environment, those around him, and you've got a man who was born into supremacy, genetically superior in every way, shape, or form. Nurture versus nature. Between Darth Vader, Kanye saying, psychologically speaking, not who would win, which one is a more effective villain?
They're both really bad at choosing assistants.
That's the intergalactic villains rule number one: is choose a very bad henchman.
We'll start with Star Wars, Team Wars.
I feel like we're on the college ball or something.
I know you are.
This is very serious.
I feel like I'm the only one who knows that I'm winning.
Judges, do we accept that answer?
I think that, say what you will about the prequels, we finally get this developmental historical look into the villain Darth Vader. And we realize that, Star Wars, the franchise, the writers, George Lucas, really have this understanding of what makes evil and what makes non-evil or normal, not pathological people. And so I think that there's this sophistication of understanding and presenting risks and vulnerabilities in a person's development to show that there are many factors that go into what makes a person destructive and evil and antisocial. So for instance, with Darth Vader, you understand that he grows up with a lot of loss. Anakin grows up with having been enslaved, losing his mother, struggling with good and evil. And there's this, finally we have this understanding that he wasn't necessarily born this way, but that he has experienced extreme adversity and loss and trauma, and that builds his character. And even, as we come full circle, we're reminded that humans are complex, that we have good sides and evil sides, and that's, that speaks to all of us. That speaks to the nature of psychopathology and what the difference is between normal and evil.
Well said. I think when you look at both Vader and Khan, there's a lot of interesting aspects to these characters. I think Vader is someone you could probably diagnose with borderline personality disorder. And I'm not the one who came up with that. No joke, the American Psychiatric Association met a few years ago at their official scientific meeting, and the keynote speech was about, is Vader, does he have borderline personality disorder? And I think he does. What the disorder is all about is incredibly unstable emotions, having an incredibly difficult time managing your emotions, having this total identity chaos, who am I, and being incredibly impulsive. So if you combine those traits with someone who has immense power of the Force, you get someone like Vader. I don't think he's necessarily antisocial personality disorder serial killer. I think he's a guy who's this third-degree emotional burn victim. When emotions happen, when they wash over him, it's incredibly difficult for him to respond. Khan, I think, is really interesting because Khan's a very different character. He demonstrates something that's the most dangerous thing in social psychology, which is when you dehumanize other people, it is so easy to rationalize insane things that you do to them. We've seen this with every war. The very first thing propaganda does is it dehumanizes people. And Khan as an augment, if you believe the Enterprise as canon, which some people may not. I think the augment storyline.
They're on
great.
Blu-ray now. They've got to be canon.
Yes. The animated series is on DVD. So this is a tangent. But if you look at what's happened with all of our wars, the moment we start dehumanizing people and thinking of them as less than us, which we always do in every conflict, you get things like the eugenics wars, and you get things like the Nazis, and I think that's what Khan represents.
But Khan is also, I mean, I'm not as familiar, I mean, I know, I saw the movies, if that's enough in these days, on Vader, but Khan actually had a psyche and then had a skew. You know, he was the eugenics guy born to lead, took over the planet, was kicked out, and then he ran into James T.
Yeah.
And then he went on this whole other, you know, a vengeance binge.
Yeah.
You know, and his planet blows up, and his wife dies, and blah blah blah. And so by the time you see him in Wrath of Khan, he's like 5 or 6 strokes beyond where he was, and you can diagnose it every step of the way. But it seems like he's got sequential things happening to him, whereas. And I don't know, Vader had all this child.
Pretty much the same thing happened to both.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. But was Vader's like earlier life, and then Khan's might be later life?
Am I allowed to jump in and interrupt and make fun of people, or should
Yes.
I?
Color commentary.
Okay. So, first of all, when you describe Darth Vader, you pretty much described me too. So I'm a little nervous about that. Yeah, dude. Here's the thing. Khan's like, he likes to yell. He's got those boobs and all. Darth Vader's got a lightsaber, so he wins. I don't know. These are pretty fancy words, and I'm really impressed, guys. But come on, what lightsaber? You know, Khan got taken out by that bomb, the Genesis.
Here's a cool
Vader's like,
thing.
what? I'm gonna blow up your planet with my space station.
Here's a cool thing about Star Trek versus Star Wars. You guys have a Death Star, you can blow up a planet, but only in Star Trek can you blow up a planet and create a new one simultaneously using science.
Darth Vader can go blow up your new one too?
I'm really going to go to the lightsabers and, okay, so the what's the basic YouTube thing where they beam, you know, they have the Enterprise and Death Star and they beam a photon aboard and put their shields up and that's all they have to do to, so I
I knew it was going to boil down to who would win in a fight. I will say this, though, as a completely unbiased moderator. Khan is superior enough to remember people who weren't even on the crew the first time he met them.
Khan was smart enough to watch all the other seasons.
All right, Khan kicked the heck out of Roddy Liddell as the devil, so that he definitely scored something there.
There you go.
Yeah, right? You were the only one who got that, but somebody got it.
I mean, I know this panel is psychology driven, but to weigh the two universes through the Vader and Khan eyes is a little psych skewed to begin with. But proceed, guys.
All right. Well, the thing, no, I'm going to interrupt and delay this. Well, we were talking about them having larger-than-life personalities and thinking things are all about them, sort of. But that's also, that's what you go to a movie for. So these guys feeling like, you know, they're bit holier than thou, and everything's skewed around them. That's kind of the feeling you get projected. You project into the heroes of these movies. So them having these larger-than-life personalities isn't necessarily out of touch with any character in the movie.
You're right. I forget that some of us don't have 700 hours worth of non-movies to watch.
Lightsaber! I'd like to see the Borg attack a lightsaber, right? Modulate your shields to a lightsaber.
I read a fanfic once where it totally happened.
Yeah.
All right, round two. We've got a lot of trauma, even on this stage, in both franchises. Strength and resilience. Which franchise handled any trauma you want to run?
All right, here we go. I'm going to throw down some psychology right here. All right, so what's beautiful about Star Trek is it's demonstrated strength and resilience in all phases of it. So phase one, right when you experience something traumatic, like the destruction of Vulcan. You take Star Trek 2009, the reboot, J.J. Abrams' Trek, right? And you look at the character of Spock and how he has lost control of his emotions and how difficult that is for him, especially as someone who's half Vulcan. That's what trauma looks like right in its most infant stages, right when someone's dealing with it. Let's flash forward a little bit. Let's take my favorite captain, Captain Benjamin Sisko of Deep Space Nine. That's some Space Nine fans, yeah, represent. All right, you take my favorite episode of DS9, In the Pale Moonlight. Yes!
I was going to say the whole Dominion War arc, but personalize it with that.
What you look at that character and his rationalization process, how he's walking through his thoughts in that whole captain's log and the transformation that's happening in his thinking. That's what happens to a lot of people who experience trauma, who do things that they might not actually have wanted to in war and other situations, and how they come out on the other side. And then let's take my favorite episode of TNG with Captain frickin' Jean-Luc Picard. Okay. Tapestry. Got some Tapestry fans over here? Yeah. Very Sean Love Picker. So you take
the one where Q showed him the life that he could have had
Yes.
if he'd taken one different turn. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's a wonderful start to the career.
Great. Yeah, he's a blue shirt and he's like delivering logs and stuff. So what happens is in this episode you see a traumatic event, an attack from Nausicaans that takes out Captain's heart, and he ends up getting this artificial heart. And what happened is that touch with death changed his life. That's a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. Just because you experience trauma doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be someone who's traumatized. There's also that struggle that happens after the growth after the trauma can lead to growth, which you see in Jean-Luc Picard. There's nothing like that in Star Wars, where you see all the different phases of trauma that can happen.
Can I just... okay, to start this debate, this argument, you went 40 years of Star Trek, 4 TV series, to 11 movies. You go to a retcon to start this debate? You go to the Vulcan getting destroyed? Really?
It's a parallel universe. It's not a retcon, it's a parallel universe. It takes the best of physics now.
But
how
isn't
this stuff might actually happen.
But that transformation, that losing everything you love, that pain, isn't that exactly what happened to Anakin Skywalker?
Yes. Yeah. I would actually say that Star Wars has definitely a sophisticated handling.
That was a nice assist.
Thank you. Absolutely. Star Wars does handle trauma and adversity with sophistication, and I'll go back to mentioning what you're talking about is responses to trauma, and that there are phases to that. There are also multiple trajectories after trauma, and like Hugh's saying, for instance, there's a complicated presentation of that in Star Wars that really embodies what those complicated mechanisms are in all of us. So for instance, maybe back in the day we thought of something called the main effects model, where one thing leads to one result. So like one gene leads to schizophrenia, or one event, seeing your parents' dead bodies after the stormtroopers, or seeing your aunt and uncle, your caregivers, being their dead bodies in front of you, that's a trauma. That doesn't necessarily mean a particular end result. So psychologists think of a more complicated, transactional, ideological model of normality and pathology. So for instance, like Hugh's saying, Darth Vader had experienced what we consider risk and protective factors or compensatory factors. So things like having a mother who is very caring, a nurturing caregiver, a strong attachment. And let's say, can I say midichlorians? Let's just say, as an example, midichlorians represent some genetic code, some particular genetic code. He has a combination of genetic and environmental factors that interact in a complicated way to determine whether he will experience a normal or pathological future. We also see this with Savage Opress when he sort of emerges in the Clone Wars and we realize he's alive. Darth Maul. Darth Maul's brother, Savage Opress, and his brother are genetically related. So what happens is Mother Talzin tries to sort of create this evil villain, Savage Opress. And it turns out that he has a combination of genetic code, relationship to Darth Maul, another particularly evil guy, and his sort of what Mother Talzin considers spiritual environmental influences to interact to create this complicated end result.
In other words, I am a sociopath. I am a sociopathic, borderline personality, violent. If I had a lightsaber, I would wield it person. Maybe my daughter won't be.
Correct.
Right.
Fair point. We're going to move on to the next
Because we're strong and resilient.
We've only got so many. And so much time. So, artificial intelligence. It's a little bit of a,
Really?
it's a wild card, I know. But each franchise deals with their droids or their androids, and even the computer, sometimes separately or in different ways. Team Wars. How do you guys like to deal with your artificial?
For us, it's artificial stupidity. If R2-D2 had said like 3 things, nothing in Star Wars happened. I don't know how well you guys remember, in Revenge of the Sith, R2-D2 goes to Mustafar, Luke Skywalker, or Anakin Skywalker, who's been killing everything in sight, including little kids. Obi-Wan and 3PO arrive, and R2-D2 greets them, and he's like, blah, 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 blah. I want to know what R2-D2 is saying right there. And how is C-3PO not like, dude, something's going down. Like, there's no interaction. Like, what is R2-D2 saying there? How many curse words can he say per second?
This is actually important to know because I think the difference between how these two worlds or universes deal with this actually has to do with the way androids and robots are presented and how we as humans interact with them. So there is this intersection of fields with robotics and psychology that deals with something called the uncanny valley. You guys heard of the uncanny valley? Maybe you guys know about it. Basically, the term uncanny valley refers to non-human beings, non-sentient beings like androids and robots, and the closer they start to represent a human form, the more revulsion and disgust we as humans actually feel. So this is actually a biological response, a deeply cognitive, biological, and psychological response. Is that your android guy?
It was just
the way that Star Wars actually, and the reason I'm bringing Uncanny Valley up is that, research actually shows, there's a colleague of mine who does some research at UCSD who shows people images of androids, and some look very similar to Data, where they're sort of emulating, a human form. But we know that the closest, the sort of, as close to human form, the closer you get to that, the more negative emotions people actually feel. So I wonder, if we think about R2-D2 being clearly robotic, not trying to be anthropomorphic, not trying to emulate a human form, and you have maybe C-3PO who uses words but still clearly is distinguished as a robot. I feel like Star Wars understands that humans and androids or robots need to work together where there's that clear distinction. Whereas you have someone like Data who you would think would instill this disgust and revulsion and this sort of negative response because he's just a little too close to being human. But you've got your universe sort of interacting with him and loving him as if it's not weird.
Well, okay. One You know, this panel has grown since you first told me because, you know, since in Trek we have IDIC, it's very hard for me to just get up the hate here. But everything you've said is very true. What's interesting to me about the two franchises is it seems like, and yes, the droid, and I understand you're talking about the closer they get to humanity, a humanoid form, there can be that reaction, which is completely what happens in Trek. For one thing, if you're talking artificial intelligence and not just droids and androids, from day one, since Star Trek goes back to the 60s and comes forward as far as when it was produced, you've got stories like What Are Little Girls Made Of, where Corby is doing, and you've got a kind of a 60s, 70s, pre-artificial intelligence micronization view of things. But in What Are Little Girls Made Of, you've got the first, I think, appearance of androids, and they're all disgusted when Dr. Corby turns out to be an android, and all the people around him are androids, and that's not fair, and oh, he's not, no, we can live on, the same thing with I'm Mud. Oh, no, we can live on our android bodies. Oh, that's disgusting, or that's weird, or that's, psychopaths, or whatever. That's a spectrum, but my point is that the Star Trek over its own eras of 200-300 years, much less the eras of 40 years of production, has treated, there's a spectrum of how they treat artificial intelligence. And it's been used for, one-off story ideas, everything from the artificially gained intelligence of the augments, and oh, that's scary, and we have to stick that in a box and hide it away because of the eugenics wars. Then you have the one-off stories like Corby and like I'm Mud, and then all the way through the next gen stories. But the arc of Data itself, there were plenty of people, especially in the beginning, and all along, on Planet of the Week and in Starfleet who didn't like Data, who distrusted Data. The guy that wanted disassembler.
Nature of the man.
Yeah, and they didn't like Soong, and they didn't like Soong's work, and he was an outcast. And then you hop ahead, since you're talking about artificial intelligence, all the way to the Doctor and the holograms and what they wound up doing in Voyager. Right, with the slave holograms. They were just sticking the EMH Mark 1s out to do mining, and the last season of Voyager was all about photons be free. And the and major episodes, although that's why Voyager was a little derivative, major episodes of both shows talked about both of those entities fighting for their legal rights and overcoming them, where they're friends and maybe majority, and it was still a thing in dispute. So it's a complex question in the Star Trek universe, and it's always evolving. It's like they keep finding some new artificial intelligence to say, no, it's not real. Yes, it is, and then you build a series around that.
I feel like Star Trek really glosses it over, and they're almost afraid of it. If you look at Battlestar Galactica, that's humanity reacting to artificial intelligence or robot kind that could wipe us out, that could take our jobs. Star Trek never deals with unemployment, but some schmuck is not actually Enterprise because Data is. And you've got to figure somebody somewhere has some ambition in Star Trek. I don't know where they are. But I mean, somebody's losing their job to Data, right?
Well, now, you're talking about a million different planets and a million different cultures, but Voyager had workforce where they were kidnapping people, wiping their memory, and putting them to work. But that's the core of The Measure of the Man, was Guinan finally gets to Picard about the secret to defending Data in their trial, and he says, oh yeah, a whole army of Datas, that'll be just the ticket. And what the subtext is that's slavery again. And so that, so even if it's not I'm sorry, we had 700 hours of episodes, so there's like lots to pick and choose from, so.
Not one of them got that relationship right, though.
Let me, in the spirit of IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combinations, I'm going to say you're both right here, and here's why. What Star Wars does beautifully, yes, I'm about to say this, is it deals with emotion really well. One of the most interesting forms of artificial intelligence we have right now is the Siri on the iPhone. And what's interesting about it, there's a personality to it, there's emotion to it. And that is what Star Wars really demonstrates well with the droids. They have emotion, they have personality. R2-D2 has personality, and all you hear from him is do-do-do-do-do-do. You know, he beeps, but there's a quality. And with Data, the reason why we don't have this revulsion that we do, like, I mean, look at him, right? Like, he's so sweet and innocent. And the reason for that is he's almost childlike, and he doesn't have emotion. He doesn't have emotion, and that's why I think people aren't scared of him to the degree that psychologists would predict right now, is because we don't necessarily see him as trying to be completely like us, even though he's trying to better himself.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and also, you know, the whole thing of they were scared to go to the emotions chip and all that, because then it's like, oh, now what do we do with this character in the arc he had, and how do we go? So the last two movies, I'm turning my chip off. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Because we want the old days.
So
What a wimp.
I cannot let this this panel's flown by, and I can't let it go without my favorite question in the world. Every hero has a test, and a test of character. Where are you at this point? And you know, what are you ready for? What do you need to get ready for? The Kobayashi Maru versus the Dagobah Cave. Which one, psychologically, where are we, what does each test say about those heroes, and which one is a better test of character? We'll go, Wars
is first. I feel like I can't say anything without mentioning A Hero's Journey, which is, as you guys know, Joseph Campbell's monomyth that essentially represents many of the stories or the narratives that are all over our culture. So for instance, The Hero's Journey is a common story that's shared by many things, like we think about, in addition to Luke Skywalker, we think about Merida from Brave, Simba, The Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins. So we think about this story of this character, this individual, who is seen as odd in his world. He's in this universal world where he's a bit out of place, and he's faced with this journey and challenges, and there's a test that he must take, or someone he must fight, something he must do to prove himself. And ostensibly he wins, and he brings that information, that knowledge, that growth back to his world and makes this final decision. So I actually think both tests represent that piece, that shared piece of the hero's journey. Now in the Dagobah Cave, I believe it's a more emotional, psychological test, where, as you know, Luke is about to go into this cave, he's wanting to know, like, what's in there. It's unknown, it's mysterious to me, it's scary. And I believe Yoda tells him, he asks, you know, what's in there, what do I take with me? And he's like, what's in there is what you bring with you. That was my Yoda voice.
Very sultry.
And it's essentially almost like a projective test, that what that test embodies and represents is all of this deep negative emotional stuff that Luke is dealing with. So intense fear, hatred, anger. And sure enough, he brings in with him all of those negative, destructive emotions. And what happens? He's faced with this villain, his you know, arch enemy. He, sorry, spoilers. He strikes him, and you know, the sort of moment of seeing his own face in a helmet is one of deep terror and fear, because he realizes this is all me. These are all of my negative and negative emotions and my fears represented in this test. So I look at it like, you know, when I work with patients who are struggling with self-regulation and how to sort of negotiate their emotional abilities and responses, it is essentially a test of his ability to balance, just like the Jedi way. You balance your emotions, the negative and the positive, in order to be adaptive and get through this test.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Dagobah Cave is a great test of fear. And something that we do as psychologists is we do a lot of exposure therapy. People come to us with fears of whatever might be, heights. And we slowly have the people learn that they can ride out those fears. They can ride out the urge of wanting to run away from that. think when you look at the Kobayashi Maru, it's really a test of heroism. What we know about heroes is they put their life in danger. They make a decision that might risk their life for the benefit of other people. And with the oh God, I can't believe I almost did that. I was going to say with the Dago Cave test, with the Kobayashi Maru test is how do you respond to that? When you're in this no-win situation, what do you do? And I think there was a novel that looked at how everyone from the original cast responded to that test. And I think someone like blew up the ship. And it's a great example of heroism. So they're very different tests. They're both good.
Well, the Kobayashi Maru is designed for you not to win it. It's all the Kobayashi Maru is all about your reaction is analyzed. Now Kirk is the famous one because he actually totally just went out of the box and blew it away. But the main point of that is not a life or death thing. It's we're going to look at how you went down basically and see your reaction. I mean, it's a lot like about emotion. It's a very one-off thing, and it was first season, and it was Wesley Crusher. But the psych test that they gave Wesley as part of his academy entrance, where he thought he was doing all these tests, but the real test was the thing that he didn't expect because it had pinpointed it about his specific case. So yeah.
I don't understand what the Dagobah Cave is. Can somebody explain to me what? It's not a test.
It's your
You didn't pass it. I don't understand what happened.
It's sort of forecasting what will come, right? Like we obviously, I don't know. I look at it like a symbolic thing that didn't actually happen. It was sort of like this, as I said, a projective test where he imagined it, he fantasized that this happened. It was very real to him. And then later we find that what happens is that I don't believe he fails the test, but he does go in with strong negative emotions. And what happens is that he doesn't succeed. He comes away feeling defeated because of his impulsive, sort of quick to act, quick to take his weapons. And I think that later on in the movie, we see him act the same way. So we have a real life test. Just like in Kobayashi Maru, in the second movie, where Spock actually takes the test and has to sacrifice himself. Oh yes, I know. Has to sacrifice himself for, the good of the people. So Spock actually takes that test. He takes the actual real life test, not the, the simulated test.
Yeah, isn't that the line, how'd you like my yes, or how'd you like my answer, or to the Kobayashi Maru?
Yeah, to the no-win scenario.
To the no-win scenario. But, Andrea, let me ask you a question, because you said something, you imagine that it didn't exist. I hear Star Wars fans talk a lot about imagining something didn't exist when they're talking about the prequels.
I'm being told, sadly, I can talk about this stuff all day, but and probably will. But I'm being told that we have to wrap it up. So we have to know, guys. I couldn't necessarily decide, but between these two.